Hello there. For more than a decade, today's guest and his expert team have been creating costumes for the entertainment industry. From London's Westend to TV's most popular shows, their creativity ranges from the spectacular to the specialised. He's also one of my favourite collaborators to work with, and I'm excited today to learn more about his journey to date. But these are the headlines, and as always, it's the bits in between that we're going to dive into. Fresh from the London Palladium, where he and his team have been awakening Sleeping Beauty for the UK's biggest pantomime production. I'm Shep, and this episode, we're getting notes from James Maciver. Let's do it. All right, James Maciver, here we are.
Hello.
Let me ask you first of all, how far outside of your comfort zone is doing this kind of thing?
Oh, it's hugely, probably as much as it is for you to create costumes for a production.
Yeah, you are right. Well, listen, I'm genuinely, you're following a really good run of eclectic and interesting guests that we've had on the show. And I know that you're going to be a great guest and very interesting. And I'm personally really excited to have you here. We always kick off with common ground. So how I might know the guest and or am connected to the guest. We've collaborated on quite a few things in the past, been involved with similar companies who've worked on things together, and actually are working on something right now together that we won't discuss, but
yes,
we are. So I'm really excited today to learn about you a little bit more, learn about your journey. I'm really interested to talk to you about the business that you've built. And I was thinking about you last night, as I often do, that you are a bit of a conversation ender. And what I mean by that is I'm often sat in rooms or situations where people are discussing who to work with and who to collaborate with when producing things. And oftentimes, if it's a director or a choreographer or a lighting designer or a writer, there can be quite big, protracted conversations. But actually, when your name comes up, people typically go, yep, great. So I was thinking that's a good thing, right? That's either an excellent reputation or you just don't charge enough, one of the two.
Or a combination of both of them. Yeah. No, I think it's having been so diverse in what we've done. We've had a touch point with so many different areas of the industry that we work in. And I think, it's so connected. Everybody knows everybody, and it is such a small industry. And I think one of the things is there's not many people doing what we do to the scale that we do it. So I think naturally a lot of the dots get connected through word of mouth,
And that we'll talk in more detail as we go on about the range of what you do. But in terms of the range of scale, it's varied too as well. You from the kind of high-end spectacular, like we'll talk about the Palladium, right down to maybe more kind of like modest budgets or projects as well.
So anything from, a whole set of costumes for the Palladium to an individual cabaret performer or circus performer who is doing gigs in pubs and clubs. So it's really the whole spectrum of entertainment.
I love it. Can I just ask on that note, we both mentioned the Palladium. How are you? How has it been? Like you just finished, right?
Yeah, we just finished. The show is live. It's all good. Sometimes it's a bit of a miracle how it all happened because magic is not real. But I think it's always the time of year for me where it's like crunch time. All the deadlines finish at the same time. And then I kind of get spun into this world of magic and fantasy in a theatre, which is kind of where I started doing what I do. So it's always a little bit of a homecoming to go back to London, be in a theatre, be around all those creatives and just somehow think, how are we going to get all of this stuff done? And before you know it, it's done and you've left.
In terms of scale and caliber, and anybody who's not seen the Panto at the London Palladium, like you really should. I love Panto and Panto on any scale, be it a local community centre or it must be the biggest Panto in the world. Yeah,
it really is. And I think it really pushes the variety show, the camp spectacular to the new levels. And I think it's always really difficult to explain what Panto is for one, but then next level on what the Palladium Panto is.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And it is Because there was it took a break, right? It was dormant, or there was a period when they didn't do it, and then maybe is it 5 or 10 years ago it came back, or longer?
So yeah, it stayed out of the Palladium for 30 years.
Really,
there was
long?
a 30-year gap for Panto being on at the Palladium. Then it kind of became more of a receiving house where they stopped taking long runs of big shows. To now where this year is the 10th year anniversary of the Palladium Panto. So it's been happening for 10 years. It doesn't feel like 10 years ago that we first started with Cinderella. So it's time flies.
So that, it really is, if you can go and see it, because it is the most spectacular production and show. And I would say you're also watching the masters of pantomime craft. I mean, so many great artists performing around the country, but that is really the creme de la creme of panto artists.
Yeah, and I think because they've built such a family and such a kind of a formula, for want of a better word, of how to put this together. And it is pantomime mixed with, bits of old school variety, special acts. And I think it's kind of crazy when you're in the tech period to think, okay, we just move from piece to piece to piece, and then it all comes together and you build a show. And, I think that's quite special.
Yeah, and so, sometimes those links are tenuous, which is all part of the magic and comedy of it.
Yeah, and the fun of it. And I think, the other thing with the Palladium is because it is unlike any other show from a design perspective from costume, because there's not just one costume designer. There could be 10 people designing the costumes for the show. And that's what's great for us, is we get to kind of be involved. We've worked with designers creating costumes for the show. We've designed costumes for the show. So it's great to kind of have that real collaboration, with the production company in bringing it to life.
And when does that process start for you? So we're moving into Christmas now. The Panto will run till, is it mid-January or end of January?
Mid-January, yeah.
So when does the process start for the next one, and what does that involve or look like for you?
So it's kind of already started, and it's funny how, although it's not on sale, it's happening. It's there already. The conversation of happening, what the title's going to be, what the numbers are, the booking of spaces to be like, we want you to create a production number. What that is, how many people are in it, we don't know today. Because I think it involves so much forward planning, especially for the production company, because, they're not just planning that one show. They're building the bigger jigsaw of everything else. And, in working with Crossroads and producing, the costumes for these shows, we know that Newcastle's next year's Panto is already on sale before this one started.
Right.
And it just doesn't seem right. But then it's sold out by the time this year's Panto's finished. So it really is people, buying tickets to the box office on the way out. And I think, a lot of these Pantos have built such a big following of people that, want to return and are excited for next year.
I love it. I love Panto, the art form itself, but it's also such a great way to the theatre for people as well, which I kind of really appreciate. I want to come back to the creative process and that side of it, because how many people do you have working for the company now at James Maciver?
We're a team of 32.
Right.
Of all different, skill sets, from makers to pattern drapers to operational staff that are working on, all these projects all at the same time. Like I said earlier, all the deadlines literally fall for Panto in a 2-week period. And you don't know what Sleeping Beauty you're working on, what Jack and the Beanstalk you're doing. So it can become quite confusing.
So tell me then, from the moment you get the brief from Crossroads, that arrives with, how does that arrive with you? And then what does that look like internally for you at the studio?
So it's varied. I mean, this year, for instance, they'll come and say, we're setting a big production number in a bathroom. And that was quite challenging because people don't wear anything in a bathroom. So then you're thinking, well, how can I bring, the Panto element to this scene? And like anything, we start so early on that the creative process keeps going through the year. So choreographers have different ideas, directors have new ideas, it evolves, it changes. So you kind of start with, thinking, well, what's in close proximity to a bathroom. So you kind of naturally lean a little bit towards swimwear, dressing gowns, towels, all of those things. And I think it really was a challenge this year to be like, this is what this is, because it's not a normal scene to kind of come up with.
Yeah, that's really, so in terms of the people in your team, talk me through that process, like the different specialisms that you have. How will that project pass through your teams on its journey towards being on stage this week?
Yeah, so the client will come to me with the brief or the ask of an idea.
And that's you taking the brief in the first instance? Yeah,
that would come to me. Then I would kind of develop it, think about it, bounce around some ideas with the client. Typically mood board it, get some color on there, understand, what the basics are going to be. Then I would start sketching out rough sketches, rough chop and change pictures, etc. And then I would send it to an illustrator who would illustrate the final polished look that we then would share back with the client. We would then get the client sign off and it would come through to us. And again, because we start early in the year, we don't know who's going to be wearing this stuff. So we just start.
So this is pre-casting then?
Yeah, pre-casting. It would typically be, in April or May that, the first stage of creating a garment would happen. So we would typically start with like an average size male and female dancer. And we would produce like prototypes to those sizes with the view that we've kind of nailed some of the detail with myself and the pattern team who are creating these garments to have an understanding of, okay, we now know where the jumping off point of this is. We've got some ideas. And typically then it would be parked for a period of time. Once it then comes back and we get the finalized casting, etc., we revisit the original prototypes that we built, refine the measurements, have a more in-depth then build of the patterns. It would then go through and be cut out by a team who would cut everything out of all of the fabrics. And then it falls through into the team of machinists that we have, who would follow the original samples and bring these garments, to life. They're then all photographed because, again, we asked to make more. So we want to kind of document what we've done. And it would go through to our operations team who would then pack that, dispatch it out to the theatre. And that's then when we would do all of our fittings, all of our final alterations on site at the theatre for that kind of tech week period.
I really love hearing that process, and I would say probably that with the Palladium is a nice timeline and process compared to other projects that you can work on. And what I really appreciate about you mapping it out like that is I think costume can often be, bizarrely, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but an afterthought sometimes in production planning. But there's so much that goes into it if done well and properly that perhaps people wouldn't anticipate or expect, like the R&D, the material testing, and allowing that opportunity for. What I love about working with you is whenever we kind of start with a seed or an idea, you are absolutely one of those creatives who takes it further and kind of brings it back to thinking, this is exactly what we wanted and more. And now you're giving us something else to think about and riff on, and away we go. So we might come back to the Palladium a little bit later on. Yep. But for now, let's just dive into the history of James Maciver. Tell me how you ended up sat here. Where did it begin? Where did your kind of connection with entertainment, theatre, performance begin? What was a young James doing and into?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because nobody in my family works at all in the entertainment industry. So I didn't have that kind of family or family friend connection that were like, here's the gateway to this industry that you're going to work in, and where your passion lies. I kind of had to discover it myself. And
what was around you? Where are you growing up, James?
So I grew up in South Wales, in Barry Island. That's where I'm from. And, I had a gateway to like the Amdram world of performing, but was really uncomfortable in this world because it was like, I loved the theatre and the performance side of this. in watching stuff, but I'm not a performer. So I think I kind of realized that the stage was not the place for me. But at that moment in time, there wasn't the equivalent of the creative world on an Amdram level of, getting involved with the people making the costumes. I think the dots didn't kind of connect for me as to what the flip side of this was.
Yeah.
I guess when we did Amdram Productions, they just hired a bunch of stuff in, we put it on and did the show, and that was that. But I didn't know, where did you go to work on that stuff? And as a child, my grandmother was a garment maker. So she came from industry and making clothes and gloves predominantly. And she sewed at home. She had a sewing machine that I was always fascinated by. How could we kind of create these things? And, I used to work with her and sewing as a hobby. So I had a really early start with sewing. It was kind of part of life. My gran made clothes for, her children and herself. So it came from that background, the sewing side of things. Then when I kind of made a connection that, hold on, there's people doing this sewing, but for the creative world of costume making for theatre, I kind of was like, that's my kind of jackpot. This is where I want to be. It kind of combines.
So what was that
worlds.
realization, or what was that hook? Can you remember, or was it something specific?
Not really. I think there was a time when I was looking for a job and was like, okay, there's an option to go and work in the kind of costume hire world, which when I was at high school, I did some work experience in a costume hire company. So I kind of went back to be like, okay, maybe I can work in the costume hire world. And I worked in a hire place, hiring for film and TV and theatre productions in South Wales in Cardiff. And from there, I was like, okay, this kind of is, there's more to this beyond this hire shop. There's versions of this for these production companies. And I saw an advert for a position to be a wardrobe assistant on a tour. And I was like, oh, maybe I could kind of go into that world and see a bit of that, but with no experience of doing that. And often that's what these production companies are looking for. I kind of took a leap and was like, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no. And I remember having a job interview when I was on the bus going from work to home. And they kind of said there and then, we want to offer you the job, how soon can you start? And from then on in, I kind of realized that, okay, now I'm right in with these people and where I want to be. And I've always been a bit of a sponge and absorbing stuff around me. And I think, going in and being a wardrobe assistant at the bottom entry level to the company, it kind of really just gave me the foundations for, what I've built and developed, today, from those early days, back on tour.
So what age are you now?
I would say I am 17, 18.
And have you done anything academically really that connects to what you now do?
No, so school for me was a really bad time. Like I just really didn't enjoy school. And I think late on in school, in GCSE level, I mean, I didn't even take textiles as a GCSE because I didn't really have much interest in it. But then I did drama as a side. At GCSE is what I did with drama. But one of the things was in my drama class, my teacher was actually more of a technical based drama teacher. And he had a background and he worked in the Westend. He was a technician on Starlight Express.
Okay.
And then he went back into teaching after. So he kind of spoke to me and said, there is a world where you can do a technical GCSE in theatre rather than the acting side. So I did a technical GCSE in drama from a lighting and sound perspective. And I think that for me was like, okay, there's another facet to this.
Yeah.
But it was so late in me being in school that I think had from the beginning of high school, I'd have had this kind of opening of I guess, a level of comfort in school to just kind of let your guard down and do and be who you want to be, I think that would have helped a lot. So once I left school, I was due to go to college. I did start college, and back then you had to do a foundation in art or arts and crafts.
Right.
But I loved the sewing, and the arts and crafts sewing part was really, really simple. And I was just a little bit like, this, it's not enough of the sewing. You know, we did all other mediums, metalwork, stained glass, pottery, drawing, and all of those pieces for me were just like, I wasn't interested in enough of doing those things. I wanted to do more of the sewing, that I just kind of come to the conclusion that college wasn't going to be the place for me. And therefore I quit college and went straight into work. And I think that being in work with people who had a craft and loved working in the industry is what I think then gave me the determination to kind of learn and be absorbent of those around.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We've filmed now, I don't know, 6 or 7 of these interviews with an eclectic range of people from art and the creative industries, and already something that's becoming a bit of a reoccurring theme and that I'm getting increasingly interested in is the balance between the academic education and self-taught training and learning outside of that. And like you say, kind of taking opportunities. And a lot of it comes down to, you mentioned the tutor that you'd had who'd been the tech on Starlight. A lot of it comes down to meeting the right people at the right time that can kind of give you this information or share that with you. So I think it's really interesting that, because people can spend a lot of time and a lot of money in education and it not necessarily be the best route, but equally I understand that it can be scary for somebody to step out of education early doors if that pathway isn't there. And presumably we're not that far apart in age. So like when we were teens, like it was still the stage newspaper every 2 weeks and you would circle things and call people up on a landline, so information wasn't as available as it is now.
No. And I think, it's like education for me is, in the way that it operates, is quite archaic. And I don't think it's a one size fits all solution. And I think, if you were like me interested in costume making, we could teach mathematics, we could teach English, we could teach all forms of language through costume as a topic rather than through what today we're going to learn pie. And it's like, well, if you could teach, little me now pie, but from the basics of making a circle skirt, I would understand it because I'm getting something out of it. And I understand that now. So I think a lot of the way that children are taught is not that kind of one size fits all model. And I think it's a shame that, more gateways to all industries. And, a lot of people would learn a lot more in being taught through a creative way of teaching rather than kind of old school textbook. One size fits all. And
you also mentioned as well about the Amdram outside of school, and like I similar to you, like I wasn't big on school, and school wasn't big on me, and it wasn't until I kind of started doing theatre and bits that I felt like I'd found my people a little bit, or I found a world that I was kind of comfortable and happy in. So I think that's also something that I would encourage anybody to do, kind of like younger people listening, is like outside of education, try and get involved in as much as you can. And if you see somebody doing what you'd like to do, like, go and ask them or try and get in contact. Because I do find people are typically very generous with their time and advice.
I think it's like you said, back in the days of circling in the stage newspaper and phoning people, or looking up a fancy dress shop in the yellow pages to go and find some interesting things. I think, in today's world, luckily that so much more is available online and through things like, platforms where you can go and learn things. And if you are wanting to learn, it's just at your fingertips now. And I think that is amazing because, when we were younger, you did it through trial and error, or if you knew somebody who might know something, it was almost like a secret. It was like a secret craft that, unless you knew people, there was no Google, there was no internet that we could go searching on for things. How do you do this? It was,
it's so like we sound like real like dinosaurs, but it is like I can remember. So something that was very helpful to me and was a kind of just a twist of fate was that after my GCSEs, I got better GCSEs than anybody expected, including myself. And so rather than going to the college that I was going to do performing arts at, I stayed on at the school to do sixth form, which was way more academic than I was prepared or capable of doing, which I quickly learned. And then decided, I am going to go to that other place, but I'm going to have to wait a year now. Yeah. So I took a year out. I was already doing I'd done bits of acting work and things like that. And was doing lots of theatre. But I went and got a job at Alton Towers as a performer, as like a street artist and what have you. And I was incredibly lucky because at that time I think Merlin had just taken it over. They still had big budgets and they were investing a huge amount in their productions and in everything across the park, like very, very different to how things have kind of changed a lot now in that industry. But all of the heads of department were incredibly generous with the time, and you could kind of stay late or come in your day off, or they would kind of have shadow schemes that you could do. So again, that sponge thing, you just learn so much. And so many of those people that were there then have now gone on to, kind of do really cool things in the industry. But it was, like if you wanted costume, off-the-shelf costume or wigs or things, for example, I can remember the shops that existed like in Stoke or Crewe or Sandbach or places you'd have to go. Like for juggling equipment, we would go to Hebden Bridge because that was the best place. There was a factory there. Like you think of Amazon now, or like it's, anyway, it is a different world. Back then, what were you seeing that was inspiring you or exciting you? Were you already identifying within entertainment or production costumes or even practitioners that impressed you? Or
yeah, I think it was, not knowing too much about the people creating the stuff back then. Because again, unless you had a program and you would look up a name, then you would maybe go and find the book that might reference them. I think it was just, going from South Wales to London to watch a show with, my mum was, a real exciting thing to do. And, everybody who knows me will know that I don't really get excited about things. And my mum always used to say, you were the child on the fairground ride looking like you were having a terrible time, but you were loving it. And I think, going to see shows, I remember going on high school trips to London to see productions and, Starlight was one of those productions, and it was just like, this is amazing because it's so different from real life, it's so out there. And I think, for its time, it really was, really different. And I remember an occasion whereby Mum and I had gone up to London to watch The King and I at the Palladium.
Can I just say, why are you saying up to London from Wales?
Well,
that really annoys me. Mind you probably go up and down. Is that why?
No, I think you would go across, because we would go across from Bristol across then. So it would be across to London, but it would always be up to London.
All right, really. But I don't know whether it's because we're from the Midlands, right? Yeah. And by the way, my brother is now married to a Welsh lady and lives near Abercorn, I think is where they are. It really bothers me when people say going down or going. My wife Lauren does it all the time. I said, we're going down to London. We're not going up to London. What I'm really glad that you mentioned about your levels of excitement or how you display them, because you are the quintessential swan in the range of emotion that you display is limited.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that really reassuring. Like I've definitely been in meetings or situations with you where like time is pressing, or maybe the brief or budget is slipping, and you're composed, you're calm, which is reassuring to be around. But then also sometimes I find you tricky to read as well.
Yeah.
And I know that's because the cogs are turning and it's, but I'm glad that you've referenced that and that your mum identified it. When you think about going to London with your mum, can you remember going to see?
So we went up to see King and I.
Great. Who was in that then?
Elaine Page. It was, a big show. It was, the first time that I'd really seen it. I don't think I'd seen the film at that stage.
Right.
But to go and see this big musical on a big stage in a massive theatre, because I think, we had local theatres in Cardiff really that you would go to, but they're twice, 3 times the size of that. And I think that for me then really was like, I want to do this, whatever this is. I don't even know what it is at this stage. I want to go and do that. And I remember my dad was friends with Mike Doyle, and Mike Doyle was appearing in Greece at the Dominion. And we got invited to go to the opening night of Greece. And I remember going backstage to have a little look around, and I don't remember a lot about it because it was just so mesmerizing, and how all these big massive pieces of scenery moved on their own and all this stuff happened, and it was a real spectacular of a show. And I've always said that I will never go to see Greece because I've got such massive memories of this huge spectacular in 1993 at the Dominion of seeing this show. And I think I knew then I want to be in this world, but I didn't know what I wanted or what I could do in that world. I knew I couldn't be on the stage. That was just not the place for me. So I think it was, inspiration around that. The other thing would be is you would only know about these shows if you had a flyer or somebody'd been.
Right.
Because you wouldn't have pictures of things to kind of look at, and, old kind of Cameron Mackintosh books that you would find about old Phantom shows and Les Mis and, seeing those things. And I remember like Christmas time, family members used to often get me an album, a CD of a musical recording from HMV. And you would see pictures in the back of there in the little brochure that was in there. But it wasn't very accessible not because of where we were based, but just from a touch point of you wouldn't know.
Again, trying not to sound like dinosaurs, but like 4 or 5 TV channels. Not everybody had Sky. There wasn't internet or social media. No. And so, advertising was localized. So you wouldn't necessarily be getting inundated with. And like similarly, I remember subscribing to, it must have been some kind of musical theater magazine where each month you get the magazine and a CD like Oklahoma or Oliver or Phantom. And you could, like you say, read the sleeve and had all that. But going back to those early inspirations, I mean, they are whoppers. I mean, talk about iconic costume. Like Grease it's got to be up there as one of the most kind of recognizable from that kind of costume aesthetic perspective. And the King and I as well. I mean, I think, here's some trivia for you. I think Deborah Kerr, who was in the movie of The King and I, was buried in her dress, in her costume.
Oh, really?
I think she loved it so much, but write in if that's not right. But I think that is true. I was in a production of The King and I when I was, I don't know, like 18, 19, and it was directed and choreographed by a guy called John Cumberledge, was from Stoke, but had some success on the West End. He was in La Cage aux Folles. And I think after the run of La Cage aux Folles, bought the set and costume, and he then became specialised in kind of wig and costume and what have you. But anyway, John, if you're out there listening, still think of you. So they're huge inspirations. And then just linking it back to that call, you're on the bus, that's your first real step into the world then?
Yeah, it was my first real step into the world. I, went into work the next day, handed in my notice and was like, I'm off on the road. I didn't really know what it meant.
Yeah.
I didn't really know where we were going. I had to get used to booking digs again with the digs list that was printed off or photocopied. And then you phone all these people and randomly go and stay in their spare bedroom for 2 weeks to a month,
And what was the kind of experience like, kind of socially on a personal level?
Yeah, it was, an amazing family to be a part of. And I don't think I kind of thought about that at the time, but it was an amazing family to be around, all amazing people that, have done loads of stuff before that, have done loads of stuff since that. And I think it was just, being immersed in that world of everybody's living in one another's pockets, all the good and the bad things that come with those.
Yeah.
Again, I think at that age, learning really quickly about, okay, this is what this is how this works, this is what's expected, and working really, really hard,
Yeah.
I think I worked really hard back then. It was, a job that I loved, but it was a really challenging show to do and move around and, doing 8 shows a week.
What was the show?
Beauty and the Beast was the show that I did. Moving around, getting used to things, booking digs on the way on the train to the next venue, thinking, I'm going to arrive in a couple of hours. Like, I need somewhere to stay. And I think, just, having that sense of community and being part of something. And then, having that entry to the world of people talking about what's happening, what's coming, what's the next show, what's the production company that you're working for doing next? How can you, have, be part of other things? There's always what's going on. And I think the whispers of that was quite exciting at the time.
And from that point, and then on your journey to getting to London, was there any kind of people in particular that helped you out or took you under their wing, or that you would consider to be kind of mentors or guides on the journey? Yeah.
So like when Beauty and the Beast finished, that I did with UK Productions, there was an opportunity to go back to the kind of base in Blackpool to work on refurbishing these costumes that had been out on the road. And I worked with a lady called Elizabeth Dennis, who designed the costumes for Beauty and the Beast. And she actually headed up the wardrobe for UK Productions at the time. And, we went in, we overhauled everything, we changed things, we made things differently to how they were made before. And I think that's then when I kind of really realized, okay, I not only want to work on these productions, I want to create this stuff. And I think, working with Liz was a real opportunity to kind of be creative, tackle things together, work to super tight deadlines and create her vision really, because it was her design, and work with her creating that stuff, was really rewarding at the time. And again, we worked really hard. I just worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because I absolutely love doing it, What do you mentioned just then, timelines and deadlines. Yeah.
Have you always been good with pressure? Or is that something you've had to hone or?
I think it's almost something that you become immune to. Me and a friend of mine had a conversation like after the pandemic to say, we've realized like how much stress and pressure we didn't even know we were under, because you kind of become accustomed to working constantly to these tight deadlines and turnarounds that you don't even know. So it's only sometimes when you work with people who don't work like that they say, actually, this is, you're doing the job of 4 people here. And you're like, well, I'm not really, you're just really slow. And then it's that eye opener of having conversations with people to say, this is tough. And I think it's, again, is not for everybody. And I think that's the thing of, it's not a hobby craft sewing club. It's making serious stuff for serious deadlines that sometimes is tomorrow. And it's like, okay, we don't even know what we're doing. And it's like, well, we just need to kind of thrive in that environment to succeed, really, Well,
and that is a skill and mentality that will certainly serve you well now with some of the TV work that you do, because I know that there's certain kind of primetime TV shows that might be broadcast live on a Saturday night, and you'll get the brief maybe like on a Wednesday sometimes.
No, and I think, back from when we used to work with Shireen and the team at Saturday Night Takeaway, building stuff for Ant and Dec, it was
Can I just say, I discussed with James before the interview that I might have to extract some showing off or name dropping from him. So I'm glad that he's brought that in himself.
So working Saturday Night Takeaway, it's developed in the week. They have rough plan once they, start off, but it's very topical. What's going on? What's happening? And, there were a couple of occasions. One was there was this whole phenomenon about, is the dress black and gold or is the dress cream and gold? This big internet.
I remember it. Yeah.
Kind of, going viral before I think going viral was a thing about the dress.
It was around the same era of like where you'd hear a sound and people would be like, do you hear this or do you hear this? And people would just go nuts over it. But I remember the dress thing.
So, we're there and it's on a Saturday morning, ready to film that night. And they're like, okay, so we want the cream and gold dress and the black and gold dress. And we were like, but it doesn't exist. This whole dress thing was not real. This wasn't some people taking pictures of two different dresses. So then we're kind of shopping to create these dresses. So we had the original dress, but then we had to make the other dress that looked like it in a different color. And, it's stuff like that of being able to think so quickly on your feet of how are we going to do this? And it is on tonight. There's no extra time. That's what we want to do. And we've been given this challenge. And I think another big one on that show that we worked on was the production company had an idea that Ant and Dec had hosted the Brit Awards that year. It was the year that Madonna fell over when they pulled the cape and it didn't come off.
Right. Good costume malfunction reference. Thank you, James.
And I think, they were like, okay, we want to kind of film this thing that maybe Ant and Dec had something to do with Madonna falling over. And their idea was it was going to be a recording of Ant in the suit, putting the cape on, tying it around his neck, and Dec would go to pull the cape off to check it came off properly. Instead of pulling the cape off, he pulled off all of Ant's clothes. And this happened on the Thursday night of the Brit Awards. So on Friday morning, Shireen called me and said, they've got this crazy idea. We want to do this. Could you make this work? And on Friday morning, the motorbike arrived with all of the suit on there that they had sent me. And I had to basically workshop how we were going to make this work to just do one take of pulling the suit off with the cape, So we're rigging all the suit, faking all of the suit with magnets, etc. So we did that on the Friday. Then on Saturday morning, I'm down in the TV studios, fitting it for the first time with like 2 hours before we then go and film this. And it's just, you have to just use that energy as fuel towards, thinking of and problem solving on your feet in that situation, because there's nothing you can do. You've got to you've got to thrive on it, really.
Yeah, well, you realize as well, don't you, that like people who panic or who get stressed or irate or confrontational, like it isn't time efficient.
No,
it's just like go for it, but you're wasting time.
Yeah.
So actually becoming kind of zen and centered, which you are like the master of, is essential to make the most out of the time that you've got.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, it's a good and a bad skill, because you then start to address everything in life with the same thing of, we'll do it this way. And then it's like, me and my husband have loads of conversations where he's like, we're not at work now. And I'm like, no, I need to remember that, because he's
reminding you of that, isn't
we're
he?
in a democracy. It's not, we need to have a conversation about this. Whereas I'm, so used to working in that environment where it's like, we just need to do this. This needs to go now. The courier's waiting.
Yeah.
There's no time for us to have a consultation period on what to do,
Yeah. So but that call that you're getting from Shireen in the studio, are you expecting a call like that while the show is on, or can that be out of the blue? And if it is out of the blue, how do you fit that in with the rest of your operational business?
Yeah, so it is out of the blue. And I think the bigger that the company's grown, the more kind of structure that we've had to put in of, what deadlines do we have planned? You know, we now have people that kind of what we call float people.
Right.
They don't have scheduled work. They're kind of there waiting for something to land, because otherwise we don't have that flexibility of taking on some of those.
So you've had to build in that
jobs.
agility. What about from a material perspective? And Chris, my partner with Fuzzy Lightbulb, who you know, like I learn a lot from him about kind of fabrics and materials and availability and shipping and what you have to go further afield for, or that needs to be bespoke sometimes that people don't always appreciate. In those instances that you're describing, is it essential that you, for that kind of thing, that you carry a large amount of resources, or is it just knowing where to go quickly to get stuff, or a bit of both?
I think a bit of both. I mean, we do keep a massive stock of stuff because it's just one of my kind of bugbears. It's like, oh, if only I had that. And I think, you know, that's expensive because we need to keep this stuff. But there's just a lot of stuff that we use day to day of raw materials that we're just like, let's just, you know, keep that stocked up. We've always got that ready to go. Because, you know, in all best plans, stuff happens and the courier's late or someone doesn't deliver something. So I think it's kind of trying to build that buffer that we don't always get into keeping a stock so that we're just good to kind of hit the ground running. We might not have exactly what we need, but we'll have something that we can say, we have this. It means you can get it tomorrow.
And how understanding do you find the kind of producers or production companies with you in those situations? Or is it a case of the moment you've said yes, you've just got to deliver it?
I think it's a bit of both, because I think it's sometimes like, okay, I'll do it, but I can only do it like this, or this is how I can achieve it in the time. Or if we don't want that, you know, we need to look at how else we're going to do it and how else is, you know, the route that we'll, you know, the approach we'll take with this.
Yeah. Of the kind of Saturday night TV genre that you've done quite a bit of, is there anything that you are particularly proud of, or that you thought when you saw it being broadcast, oh yeah, that does look great, we did a good job with that?
There was on one of the last series of Saturday Night Takeaway, they partnered up with Frozen to do this kind of Ant and Decca in Frozen, the musical, with Disney. And I worked with Shireen and the team. They wanted to create this replicating Elsa's moment from her kind of rags to riches moment, but they wanted Ant and Dec to do it. They had the West End show performing with her costume that works very well. It's beautifully made and designed. And they kind of tasked me to create a version of that for Ant and Dec that went from this kind of Nordic ice worker to the male equivalent of Elsa's blue dress. And I worked with Shireen and the team to create this. And it was kind of nail biting because, again, you don't get any time. The rehearsal happens in the week. The fittings are really limited. You know, their availability is limited, and headspace is limited for everyone because this is one factor, you know, one segment of the show that they're having to think about and action at the same time. So we did this whole Frozen thing. We'd done similar stuff before. I kind of knew the nuts and bolts of it and how we needed to make it work, but had no real idea of how it was going to go. I was also going on holiday towards the delivery time. So I just left my team to kind of send it. I didn't get to watch it, so I didn't really know what happened. And I remember being away and was like, they've uploaded the video online to watch it, to know that it worked, because I was like, you know, it all happened so quickly that you don't really get time to do the R&D that Disney would have had with Elsa's dress. You know, we've given 3 days to make this thing work, and they're probably doing that over a 3-month to 6-month period.
And yet it's still a pinnacle moment of a bit on a primetime TV show that if it doesn't go right, you know, will be a bit of a thing.
Exactly. And I think, you know, it's really cool to watch it and know that it's not had the rehearsal, it's not had the time that other things have, but it's all worked and achieved what it needed to achieve to make it work for what they wanted, you know.
What also on a personal level, like what a testament to your team and your faith in your team to be able to kind of leave them to do that and deliver that. That must feel amazing.
Yeah, no, it really does. And I think, the team are great. They know, they take direction. They're like, okay, we collaborate together of how are we going to do this? Because none of us really know. And then we almost just have to entrust in it's just going to work. We can't think of what's not going to work, because we would just keep going around in circles and never get it out the door.
Two questions for you, kind of related to that. How good are you, or have you had to become at delegating and at not always having your hands physically on the delivery of projects? And then I want to ask you about costume malfunctions after that, just because you brought up Madonna. So in relation to, we were just discussing being able to kind of step away from something when you need to, or timelines or capacity necessitates. How easily or challenging have you found it being able to take your hands off projects and delegating, coming from a background where you are physically doing it and delivering it to, with the scaling of your business and projects, now having to step back a little bit more? How easy have you found that, or do you find that?
I think, in growing the business and, from going and starting doing everything myself to then having to kind of slowly outsource things. And the more that we've grown, the more that I've kind of had to, share with the team, pass over those responsibilities. I think, it has been difficult, because in running a business, you typically end up doing a lot of the stuff you don't want to do, or you didn't set out to do. And I think that can be challenging to navigate, because it's like, well, how do I make this more of what I want to do, or more of the things that I used to do that I enjoyed doing? And I think a lot of that is kind of the trial and error thing of, how do we delegate to the team, get the right people in there. And I think going back to what I said earlier about doing 4 people's jobs, I think you kind of have to admit that you can't do 4 people's jobs, and you have to kind of start to pass those things on. And I think, for me, a big thing is like then writing and creating a job description for that role. It's like, well, hold on a minute. How is this person going to do all of this in one full-time role? And I've been doing it on top of what I'm already doing. And I think it's just kind of, the tree's grown a lot over the time. And I think it's been challenging to kind of navigate, because growth in the business has also been, taking on more people doesn't necessarily solve the problem. But it's only once I've done that I realize, okay, that didn't fix the problem. We need to kind of do other things and, have other processes and procedures in place. And I think, taking on a strong management team has been a real, a win for me, really, because they're there, they've got eyes and ears on everything. They've got their, pieces of the jigsaw that they own. And then that just allows me to be more comfortable in the fact that I'm not there to oversee it. They are the eyes and ears that need to kind of keep the ball spinning, really.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the business side of things in a few moments. But you did mention a few minutes ago that epic kind of Madonna fall. So what year was that? How long ago was that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Like it's within the decade, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, possibly. It might be pushing 10 years.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example of something not going right in the moment at a live event.
Yes.
Are there any other examples that you've maybe been involved in or been in proximity to where you've seen other kind of epic costume malfunctions?
I think, from my days of working in live theatre and being part of the wardrobe team and having to, be in that live environment, there's quite a few different things, going back to the Beauty and the Beast days of, times of having to undress somebody up a ladder because the fly system's broken and she's stuck in the wings. And, I think, again, all of those things make you kind of tick, I think that's, having somebody have set the understudy costume, not the real costume, then you can't get it on in a quick change and you're having to kind of, think on your feet and think, how are we going to get this, to work? I remember situations from Hairspray when, I used to swing the dressing tracks, being part of the wardrobe team. So I knew all of the dressing plots, had to kind of swing in a last minute's notice. I know dressing Michael Ball, doing Edna, behind the scenery, you know, doing that welcome to the 60s change where he's going in 1 minute as the housewife, coming out the next minute, you know, all in the full get-up. And, you know, having swung into those situations with other wigs people, you're not quite sure of the choreography that happens in this change. Someone's kicked the shoe, it's gone to one side, the earrings fall and the gloves here. And, you know, it really is you have to just be able to deal with it, I suppose, because there's no other option. However, that is, if that's somebody going on with the back of the costume open because it didn't zip up, the zip broke, you know, you together again, it's that whole team of, you know, all of you working together to just be like, oh, you're on now, but don't turn around.
Yeah, and you know, that is you know what, I hate when people say like, oh, it'll be all right on the night. Yeah. Like it really fucking grinds my gears because that level of complacency, there lies the beginning of problems. However, you make it work. And I've worked around the world with lots of different cultures who each bring their own thing to kind of theatrical performance and execution. But like British theatre, like DNA and culture is fantastic. Like there is a resilience and a dedication I find like in the industry to just we'll make it work. Yeah. Like we'll get it done. And I was thinking about those quick change moments that you described, like Michael Ball and what have you. It's typically really good fun. Yeah. However, like intense and kind of momentary those transitions are, they are typically really good fun. And I love the little dynamic that you develop with the people who you do that with, kind of like 9 times a week or however. And some of my favorite ever tech moments have been when people have left their mic live while people do that. That is just my favorite.
Yeah. And I remember one, we were doing Beauty and the Beast in the Edinburgh Playhouse, and there's a part of the show where the Beast is in full prosthetic makeup, full, you know, padded muscle suit, the whole thing. And there's a fight scene that happens where a stunt double steps in. The Beast is off to the dressing room with full tech everyone support, and it's a complete strip, all the makeup off, all the wig off, everything off. And then it's really tight because he needs to get back on, you know, for the next switch where the double comes off. And we're in the dressing room, substage, and the electrics go in the dressing room. We're in the pitch black. You know, we've all got a torch, but the reason we've gone to the dressing room is because we need full light to be able to do this. And we all just kind of clubbed together with our head torches on and just made this situation work. Like 6 of us with the actor making this work, because it's like, well, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's really, you know, it's almost the worse the situation, the more you kind of want to make it work, because you don't want this to affect, you know, those 3,000 people that are sat there watching it.
And you know, like looking at, I see this thing happening with the West End at the moment, where the stakes are getting higher technically and from all kind of aesthetic perspectives. And just thinking about like the past year or so, really, I went to see Steve Coogan in Doctor Strangelove last year, where he played 4 characters. And so there were some, what do you call it when you have like the look-alike, the word escapes me, but there was some clever staging, but there were also some rapid changes that were just phenomenal, and that they're impressive. Like I think 1 or 2 of them actually got an applause, which is great when a kind of technical aspect gets that recognition from the audience. You think about Stranger Things, like it is almost cinematic special effects in a live venue experience. Harry Potter, similar, but the higher you raise the stakes, the more pressure there is, and the more chance that something might not go right. So how you deal with that is kind of paramount, really. Thinking about you as a practitioner, do you have kind of routines and rituals that are important to you in your day-to-day work, or particularly when you're being creative and first visualizing ideas? What's the environment that you like around you, or any non-negotiables?
I think it's always a wish list situation, which always never happens. That it's like, oh, okay, I've got loads of time to design this show. I'm going to kind of take some time out and think about this. And so I don't really have any, because I think it's so fast paced and fast moving that I kind of have now just, I'm happy if people just, leave me in a quiet corner to just crack on with what I need to do, to get it done without trying to do it whilst you're in the middle of making a costume, thinking and designing the next one. So no, I don't really have any at all.
I should have expected that answer from you. All right. So let's think about then the building of the business. What were you doing? I think you were in London, right? Kind of pre starting the business. What was that? What were you doing, and what was the transition out of that into starting your own business?
So Hairspray was the last musical that I did in the Shaftesbury Theatre, and I knew that I didn't want to continue this, where's the next job coming from? Hairspray was a really successful show. It ran at the Shaftesbury for a long time. It kind of had this curse that nothing lasts, or when's it going to end? And it did really well. They were setting up a tour that was going to tour at the same time, simultaneously as the Westend was on. It was coming up to Easter, and we got our 2 weeks notice, and it was out of the blue. We were closing before Easter, and Easter was like chock-a-block bookings wise. And it just came out of the blue to everybody. It was really sad, that moment when you all get called to stage, the company manager and the producer stand there and say, this is your 2 weeks notice. And it's horrible, because you have built a family, there. So I was then faced with, what am I going to do? And I think I went for a few interviews to do some other jobs, and just kind of reached a wall and was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I don't think I want to do these unknown length contracts. I love doing it, but kind of didn't have that want to work in the pub in between doing, what I love to do. So as I'd always made things alongside doing these wardrobe gigs, I then thought to myself, I'm going to give that a go.
What do you mean by that, making things?
So made costumes for, someone might be like, oh, we're looking for somebody to make a shirt, or this production needs somebody to do that. And there's all that kind of word of mouth business.
I was going to say, and that's coming to you by the network that you've built up and established, is it, at this point? Yeah,
exactly. A friend of mine who I met through a show was like, I'm going to play pantomime. Would you make me a costume? I'm like, yeah, I'll give that a go. And, things like that. I worked doing some, really early iterations of Room on the Broom, the children's story, just little makes like that. Someone said, we need a pair of slippers for James Earl Jones in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Can you cover this pair of slippers? And, I do like little side projects.
For James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
That's a good drop. That's a good drop.
So someone would deliver a pair of slippers and say, we need to cover these to make them look $1 million. And that would be my job, to sit there after work at 11 o'clock at night, sewing velvet to a pair of slippers. And that's when I was like, I want to do more of that. But to take that leap and be in London was going to be really expensive. And I didn't have like a buffer behind me. So I made a decision to move back in with my dad, back to South Wales, move in with my dad and start doing stuff from South Wales, going back to the connections of the higher place. A lot of film and TV stuff started to start up back in Cardiff back then. They were kind of trying to move things out of London. Doctor Who was there.
I was going to say they did Doctor Who was up there, right?
Yeah, Doctor Who, Torchwood was happening. And I worked on a production, I think it was a BBC production called Merlin.
Right.
That, dipped in and out of that, making some bits and pieces. But then also kind of all the people that I had been working with, I was like, oh, I'm, free. I want to start making things. So made costumes that way and started off and little by little, I then kind of built this client basis and, work got more. I moved from South Wales up to Milton Keynes.
Across to Milton Keynes.
Yeah. Up and across. And, started off working from home. So it was all working from the spare room, creating stuff. Then took on like a small studio where it was, above a double garage, just a little kind of attic room that I built costumes in. Then took kind of freelancers on, a month at a time. Be like, I've got enough work for you for a month, for the two of us to do it. To then 3 freelancers, and we reached a point where the premises that we were in above the garage just was not big enough anymore for us to kind of magic all of this stuff out of. So I, looked for somewhere else to move to, and that's how we ended up in Olney. I drove past a sign on the side of the road next to this building that was like, this is for rent. And I was like, well, this looks like it's not big, not too big, but not too small. And we moved over there.
And how big a decision for you was that? Because you're getting serious now. You're taking on property and rent and overheads. You may be starting to create a beast that you need to feed from a work perspective as well. How did you kind of handle all of that?
I think, back from when I worked on my own in Milton Keynes, it was a lot of like, okay, if I've got that much left at the end of the month when I finish paying everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And it was, quite hand to mouth in, how I operated. I think taking on the small studio space above the garage was like a commitment because it was like another rent on top of the rent I was paying. And it was scary, but it was almost like, the work happened, so I didn't really need to worry too much about it. And I think once the work happened, it was kind of like, okay, this is not gonna be something that I need to worry about from a financial side of things. When we moved over into Olney, it was a bigger building with more expense, and I think I kind of almost just took it in my stride to be like, the worst thing that can happen is this doesn't work.
Yeah.
We've always been so fortunate that we haven't had the bad side of things. I always call the situation we find ourselves in like the good, bad, busy. You want to be busy, but then you feel bad because you're too busy, and then the balance is off with work life, and home. That, we're lucky that that's not been a problem for us, touch wood today. And we've always managed to keep things going. And, there's always times in the year now, and even today, where you're like, okay, what's happening next month? And I've always felt when you reach that stage and you think, what's happening next month? You kind of start to kind of put a few feelers out there. And before you know it, you've got more work than you can cope with. So you kind of, have to almost just trust in it a little bit that it will be okay. Back to it'll be all right on the night. This will be okay. And we'll get this.
Well, on that then, in the first episode that we recorded, we had Chanel Haynes on, who'd been, she was Tina on the Westend, and now she's touring with the Rolling Stones. And she spoke about how she got that role and how kind of proactive she was, and how she marketed herself essentially and went to the casting agencies and the producers and tackled like the business side of show business. How you've just kind of referred to it a little bit, kind of putting the feelers out. How naturally has that side of the work come to you, where the kind of marketing of your services and going out and finding new opportunities and work?
Yeah, I think again, we've been really lucky in the sense of every piece of work that we've ever had has been through word of mouth. None of it has been through marketing or me having to go out there. I mean, it's not really a world that I sit comfortably in the sales marketing world, to go out and outreach to new potential clients. And I think, one of the biggest foundations that I built the company on is I've worked on shows with these things, so I know what they need to go through. I know what they need to upstand. I know how long we need them to last. I know how expensive they are. So I kind of view it from a world of, they're not my costumes, but they need to last. So therefore, what would I expect from this, and how do we do that? So, in everything that we build, and I think this, leads very strongly into the cruise ship world of, I was able to pull all of my theatre experience and know, okay, but this is going on a ship where there is nobody to look after it. So, what fabrics can we use to create these looks? How can we achieve this high-end budget look without a high-end budget and be clever with things? And I think that, that's been a big foundation of, what we do, and how can you be clever with budgets, with fabrics, and also with, longevity piece of things. And I think a lot of people who make costumes or go to university to learn how to create costumes don't necessarily know the flip side of working with the costumes and how we're going to wash this, what's going to happen when, it breaks, how is it going to, withhold all of these shows that we're, and have the endurance that it needs, really.
Yeah, because they're not necessarily always ending up in a place where they're going to be looked after as well as they could, and they have to endure a lot. And I mean, when I was young, I can remember most dancers were quite proficient sewers and had a reasonable level of skill themselves. Whereas I think that's not the case as much now. So like you just described with cruise ships, when you're sending costumes out there, other than sending the team on for maintenance visits, it could be kind of 8 months or longer potentially without that. Okay, what about that with the market? I know what you mean. I know what you mean when you're saying that as well. But you must have a vision of the kind of work that you want to do more of, and what is that? What do you aspire to do, or want to do more of, or really enjoy doing the most?
I think building for musical theatre piece is a big piece. I only learned that these shows went on these cruise ships. My grandparents went on ships, so they always used to talk about these big shows that they would have on. But again, I had no insight on what that was. So the kind of my gateway to this industry was, the musical theatre world. Pantomime, is another big a big thing for me. But the more we've started working within the West End, creating these costumes, it's a really great feeling to have worked building stuff for Starlight Express, having gone on a school trip to see that production, to now be working on the new iteration of it, and bringing Gabriella's designs to life, working with these fabrics that are not conventional. There's no book on how you make a train.
Do you have a photo of you going to see it the first time?
No, I don't think I do.
Oh, that would have been such a nice moment to flash that up and do a then and now forget.
I don't think there's any photos, but, working and creating these things and pushing those boundaries on not creating, bog standard things, I think is always, there's so much costume that is really different, and it's avant-garde. It's pushing the boundaries on, what is possible in creating a costume. And then also, what is possible for the performer, what is possible for the longevity of the piece. But building more stuff for London is definitely been something that I've kind of pushed more towards. And the more that I've made contacts in that world, and the more that people who I used to work with before are now in kind of higher positions, building those relationships with people to create these costumes is, definitely a piece that I look back and I'm, really proud of that. And, having conquered that world and building these costumes for these, big West End shows is,
well, let's park that for a moment, and we'll come back to some of your favorite kind of West End projects. I want to talk to you just about budgets quickly, because it has been challenging, at times for the industry, and now suddenly people are kind of raving about the experience industry and economy is booming again, but that's not necessarily translating into great budgets. And oftentimes people who are in the financial decision-making position are under tremendous pressure with what they can allocate and spend, and certainly therefore are looking for reliable and sustainable and enduring materials, which is categorically something that in addition to your creativity, you are known for, is for the quality and for the lasting resources. But how does the climate feel for you at the moment? Do you feel like things have been getting tighter or more challenging, or is it inconsistent?
I think we've had to learn to be more creative with what we're doing. I think budgets haven't gone up.
Yeah.
But everything else has gone up. You know, all raw materials have gone up, staffing costs have gone up, but it's still, there's an expectation to deliver these wow moments. And I think it is being clever. It is maybe saying to clients, look, we can't quite achieve that on, you know, what we're working on, but this is what we can achieve, you know. And I think, you know, a lot of our clients have been, you know, happy with what we've done, because at the end of the day, you know, as you said, everyone's pushed on the budgets, you know, everyone's up against the same challenge. And, you know, I know if I go to a client and say, look, I really need a bit more on this, I know if they can give it to me, they will. But I know they're also understanding then of like, we maybe can't quite do exactly what they want to do. And, you know, compromises need to be made along the way. So it is challenging.
Are you always bought in at the start of a project in terms of the creative process, or can it be further down the timeline that you're bought in?
It really depends on the client and, you know, what their working practices are. You know, some, and even with the same client on different projects of like, sometimes we're brought in right at the beginning to be like, you know, we're tendering for this, we're doing a pitch for this, you know, what do you think? And we'll see that through the tender process, through it being awarded and then implementing it. But sometimes it'll be like, oh, it's next week that we're delivering this, and here's what it all is, and this is what we've said. And, you know, these are creatives that have been signed off, and these are mood boards that have been signed off, and here's the budget. But I think not necessarily, you know, wardrobe expertise has been pulled in soon enough to align client expectation with budget on, you know, what we can deliver. And I think managing expectations then becomes difficult, because I'm like, well, this amazing mood board is not actually possible to create on what we've created. So it's hard for me to then know what's being sold to the client to, you know, be able to best support with that.
I think there's a couple of things there for me. One, first and foremost, is I love having as many of the creatives in the room from the beginning as possible, just because of like the cross-pollination and the workshopping and ideas that occur from a costume, choreography, creative production, like a musical direction, like the technical and lighting, and they're so often left until the 11th hour that could have contributed to the earlier ideation stage. So that's kind of part of it. But I also think people underestimate your ability to problem solve for them. And so they sit with a problem for 90% of the timeline and then hand it to you when there's such little time to resolve it, where actually bringing you in at the earliest stage, sometimes you can, like, this is what you do. You can help kind of navigate that.
And I think there's also a piece of like being in the room with people. It's great to say like, okay, well, where does this moment lie, or where best are we to spend the budget, or can we kind of bounce ideas around to create these moments that involve all the departments? And you know, I don't think one person can create a show, you know, from all elements of, you know, the costume, the lighting, the sound, the scenery, creative, you know, the tracks. I think it really is that collaboration that I think sometimes, you know, is left behind because of time and budget, because, you know, as soon as everyone starts getting involved on a project, you know, we all want to be paid for it. And I think it's just a shame that, you know, we don't get to live workshop some of these things sometimes and bounce around ideas and say, oh, I could do this with a costume, you could do that with the choreo, I could do something with the lighting, and then you've created a moment that I think sometimes if you're in a theatre creating that during the tech period, you're under pressure, we need to deliver. You know, and
everybody's tired, stressed out and looking at the watch. And I think, like, I would argue, or maybe pitch that it's not necessarily more expensive to bring everybody in at the earliest stage. You just have to do it in the most in the efficient way. Unfortunately, what happens is clients or agencies sometimes get used to things being turned around overnight, and then that can kind of become the norm, and then they get used to robbing the process of the creative opportunity that there can be. Something else that's interesting that we've experienced a little bit of recently is AI in briefs, is people coming to us with, so we've had a little bit of a play around, and we've got some early ideas for you to start with. And it is so detached from reality or what could possibly be achievable with an unlimited budget, let alone we've got $8,500, or whatever it is. And at the same time, I think we have to accept it. It is a tool that is coming, into our atmosphere that we need to know how to utilize, because if the client can, we need to. But have you had any of that or seen any of that?
Yeah, I think I would say maybe just over a year ago, I was like, what is this AI? What does this AI thing do? And I didn't really know anything about it. Everyone was talking about it, but I was like, okay, how is this going to affect my world? What is this going to do? So, I remember going on and having a little play around with it and fell down this rabbit hole of it, creating these amazing costume designs, but came to this kind of conclusion that that's great, but we can't afford that. And this computer can't understand that we can't afford that, because it's got no concept of what we're actually doing. And I think it's great to use it as a tool to gain some ideas from. And I think, some of the things that it can throw out are really, really cool. I think it's then, taking that idea and almost in the old school days of mood boarding, when you would, search for images or even get things from books, you would then have to pull little bits of everything to create that. So I think it's great that we can use it, but I feel like it's how do you again manage an expectation when sometimes we've all got this picture of all these robot costumes and they look amazing and they're Marvel film budget things, and we're popping them in a theme park, and it's like, okay, we're not even in the same world. So I think it's
And can I just say, the nightmare scenario is an agency or somebody approaches you who is doing work for a client, and, we've already shown these images to the client. They love it. So, what can you do?
Yeah. And often my response is nothing.
Good night. See you later. I think you're absolutely right, by the way. I think the ideation, the early mood board phase, kind of like discovery and research is absolutely the place for it right now. Who knows how it will change and evolve, but until it understands the materials and textures that we work within, I think practically it's quite irrelevant. But from an aesthetic perspective, I think it can be really good to help hone and establish the brief in a kind of mood board capacity. What makes a good brief for you? What is a brief that you look at and think, oh no, that's a good, great?
I think with a brief, it's about the brief and then also about the person creating the brief, because I think it's also like sometimes the best brief doesn't have a lot of content to it, but then sometimes the best brief has a lot of content to it. So it's always, what is the product? What are we doing? What is the concept? And I think sometimes it's like, oh, we're creating this show, and it's like there's a mood board with it, but there's no content to it. So it's like, what's the context of this? Okay, this is a kids' family entertainment show that we are putting on, in holiday resorts in Europe. Okay, so there's many factors that we need to kind of think about here. So I almost like to dig beyond the brief to be like, what is the product? What's the end goal? What are the values of the brand? What do they like? What don't they like? What have we done before? Because I think it's quite easy to not think about that and then deliver the brief, but delivering it without a heart almost, because it's not got a purpose. So I like to kind of dig beyond things sometimes to kind of understand. And I think, with panto, you can kind of just set it in this fantasy world. So is anything goes. And I think that is great to kind of just be like, okay, this is just going to be big, fun, bold colors, bold shapes. The brief doesn't really matter. If you give me who the character's for, it will all work together. But I think sometimes when you're slotting in with more of a brand or another business, or it forms part of a wider entertainment program, it's really good to understand, you know, what sits beneath that brief. You know, what previous entertainment has this client had? You know, how do we make this different? How do we make, you know, I always use an analogy of how do you make a rock show look different from the last rock show? They're all just rock shows. And it is that thing of understanding, okay, but we can make it different, you know. Even I know people struggle with tracks and things when you're producing things that sit in genres. There are only so many content, so many pieces you can use, you know. A Latin ballroom show, there's the same songs in every Latin ballroom show and in every Latin ballroom show in the world. But how can we make it kind of fit and feel different from, you know, other shows? And I think bouncing ideas with people who have created the brief to, you know, collaborate really. Because I think it's great to receive a deck and be like, okay, these are the characters, make them in this and these colors. It's like, okay, but how can we make that better than that? How can we kind of take this brief to the next level, you know?
Yeah. 100%. I'm thinking about lots of things that we've both worked on and other examples too. I think you talking about the end user or the end audience is really important. I think it's important to me if I'm writing a brief and receiving a brief that you kind of want enough, but not too much so that there's room. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? And that, in my mind, that brief isn't the end of the idea. It's like me passing it on to you to now take it your distance and bring it back as something else. And I think what's a challenge at the moment across entertainment, which is why we see so many kind of like prequels, sequels, requels, and redos of things or repetition, is people are perhaps leaning into like data a little bit too much and are starting to give people what they say they want rather than what they need or might enjoy. Yeah. So actually an audience that has really loved this, let's create something fresh and new for them that they would also enjoy rather than just more of.
And it's also like trying to create something that they didn't know they needed.
That's exactly the point I'm making, is that rather than just giving them more of what they say they want, give them something they need that they didn't know they want, but that you can work out they will like if the brief is well constructed.
And I think some of those things are like, you know, you've got to be prepared to sit out of the comfort zone a little bit. Let's try and push this. How far can we push it? You know, how far can we take this? You know, without it being something that the client hasn't asked for, but just bringing those ideas to the table. Again, getting the people around the table to kind of have those conversations is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are a master of that. It's why you're such a kind of pleasure to work with. We were talking about the West End a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
What are you? I know you're going to hate this, but I'm going to draw it out of you. What are your greatest hits? What have you done so far that you're most proud of?
That's a big question.
Yeah. Well, it could be actual complete shows that you've worked on. It could be elements of. It could be singular outfits. I mean, let's start with the Palladium. So, who and what do you typically make for that panto?
So we've done a variety of stuff. We got stuck in this, I wouldn't say pigeonhole, but we were creating the baddies. You know, we created Paul O'Grady's set of costumes when he played the Wicked Stepmother, the Baroness, that Hugh Durrant designed. We brought them to life, put them on the stage, and that was great. It was great from two things. One is working with Paul O'Grady. One was working with Hugh, bringing those ideas together, and also taking panto back to the Palladium after 30 years. So that was like a massive, moment for us.
One in which James got excited, or even
yes, when I was excited. It was just great to watch and see it come to life. Like
because that is
panto before.
That is like the pinnacle. Like that, it doesn't get any better in that industry. People, place, like creative.
Yeah.
That is the top.
Yeah, and I think it was. For anyone who's worked with Paul O'Grady will know he was challenging to work with, a lovely guy, and me and him got on like a house on fire. But it was really tough, bringing it back. It was the first time he'd gone back into drag after retiring Lily, didn't want to be Lily, but only ever knew Lily, but didn't want to look like Lily. And it was really, really difficult.
That's a real like legacy and scenario to traverse then that.
Yeah. And it was like, everything from, I don't want the streak in the wig. I want different wigs. I want to look like a character. He'd played the child catcher in Chitty. He knew going to play a character. And I think he felt comfortable playing a character, but playing a character that sat so close to home in drag, being compared to being Lily, but not being Lily, but all anyone wants to see is Lily Savage. Even when he played Miss Hannigan, it's Lily Savage playing Miss Hannigan. So I think it was great to be involved in that. And also just to roll with it. Paul didn't want any gloves. So, okay, we won't give you any gloves. In the tech, he's like, where are all the gloves? It's like, okay, we'll give you the gloves. It doesn't matter,
Yeah.
And we all knew that there was a sensitivity surrounding that piece, and
which you can relate to, right? There's lots of great actors who become tied to characters who want to have a career and identity away from it.
Yeah, and I think that was really great, and then I think
By the way, now it wasn't last year; it was a year before that Julian did the tribute. Julian Clary did the really beautiful tribute. Was that last year or the year before?
It was the year before.
Yeah, which was just, I thought for them to do that in the way that they did, for him to do that, I thought that was really beautiful. I found that kind of quite moving.
It was. And I think it was an acknowledgement towards that and to their relationship, as well, because they were super close friends. Another kind of real, to do with the panto again, like a full circle moment, was when we were asked to build for Elaine Page in Dick Whittington. She was playing the Queen Rat. Again, Hugh had designed it. We got asked to bring it to life. And just taking that kind of full circle moment from being a child, sat in that theatre, watching Elaine on that stage, do her thing, to then being back in the dressing room with Elaine, in the same dressing room she will have been in on King and I, creating her costumes for her, was just really, it was amazing. It was amazing to kind of look back and think, where this all started and, where we are now and what we're doing. It was insane.
It's like a biopic, James. Like, when will it happen? You're like the Billy Elliot of costume. It is like, it's genuinely like, it's moving listening to that and hearing you talk about it at the top of the interview.
It was just so like a full turntable moment.
Full
circle. After we did Elaine, we then did Dawn French. Well, like the Vicar of Dibley was massive in our house. I loved it. I love everything that, she did. And then going back to do that and being like, okay, we're going to do Dawn at the Palladium. And, again, Hugh designed some of her costumes. I designed some of her costumes with Teresa at Crossroads. And just bringing those things to life for these people that I'd kind of grown up watching, Again, Paul Daniels, and creating a costume for him. He reached out, wanted me to build this an illusion costume for a tour that he did. But, then thinking back, when I was a kid, I watched the Paul Daniels magic show like every weekend. It was it was amazing. So then to go and work with him and Debbie creating this stuff just felt absurd.
Am I having a stroke, or was there also a program called Whizbit?
Yeah,
that was like a CBBC kind of a thing as well. But again, when we were kids, like primetime Saturday night.
And I think it's then going to work with these people, and Julian, I love all of his comedy and his pieces, and building and creating costumes for him. Working, we were lucky to build Jennifer Saunders' costumes for Sister Act, and it's just not something that I ever thought we would do.
Where Julian is concerned with those costumes, like that has become a thing within itself. Yeah. His entrances and those costumes, that moment, like 6 or 7 epic that actually are kind of like morphing almost out of costume into prop and scenery, like territory. They're so
and they've really grown over the past 10 years. And
because where do you go? Because each year, like, the stakes are getting higher.
And I think, that's what's been great about being a part of creating stuff for London has been, we've worked on that journey. Mike Coltman builds a lot of those costumes now, and he sits purely in the prop costume world. And these creations are amazing. And I even said to Hugh last week, who designs them, I said, Hugh, where do you go from here? Like, how do you finish this and then you come up with other stuff for next year that needs to be different from this year? When do you run out of ideas? And, he just laughs, and, he'll come up with the same masterpieces again, for next year's show.
When do you enjoy it? So, why I'm asking this is because I have a thing sometimes when you're delivering something that I don't enjoy it until after it's happened.
Yeah.
And then I'm kind of like, and sometimes people say, aren't you enjoying it? Isn't this exciting? I'm like, no, not until it's finished and nothing's gone wrong. And then I can look back on it.
And it's delivered. I think one of my kind of big downfalls is I'm so self-critical that even when you reach that moment and you're like, okay, I can enjoy it now, it's done, I'm like, but I could have done that better.
The analysis begins.
Oh, that could have been a bit different though. And you start, going back through the photos and thinking, we could have done that differently, or that could have been better. And I think it's this kind of like creative up and down roller coaster that you go on. And I think you always want it to be perfect, but you have to have an acceptance that like nothing is perfect, but it's like an unrealistic expectation sometimes that, the clients are so happy with what we've done. Everyone's over the moon.
That is enough.
And then I'll sit there thinking, I could have done that better.
But is that a personal and professional thing?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just thinking of your lucky husband. Last week, I was interviewing the comedians Larry and Paul, and we were talking about like when stuff doesn't land, or you can work on something for months, deliver it, and it doesn't land. Equally, there might be something that you come up with in the elevator that becomes one of your greatest hits for the next 20 years. And anyway, we kind of summed up that conversation by saying that's why it's important to enjoy the process, because the process is where you live. And the product, of course, you want it to go well and be a success, but it's to an extent beyond your control. And if you don't love the day-to-day of what you're doing, then...
Yeah, and I think, it's also about celebrating all the wins along the way, because I think sometimes it's so hard to get bogged down in the keep creating that you don't see what you have done. All you see is what you have to do. And I think it's just about celebrating, okay, that's done and we did that and everybody's really happy and it happened, Even
more important when you are leading a team.
Yeah.
Because you're now thinking about the emotional well-being and psychological safety of a whole
of everyone,
team of people around you. It's time for one of our features called Message and a Bottle, where we get a question or a message from somebody else in the industry who knows you or knows your work. And in return for answering that question, we provide you with a drink of your choice, which I believe is an Aperol Spritz. So
it is.
We'll take care of that for you, Mr. MacGyver. But my creative partner and co-founder of Fuzzy Lightbulb, the most exciting new character development studio in town, is what people are saying. Chris Barlow, master multi-hyphenate and character and puppet builder, has a question for you. And he said, as a designer and a maker, what are the things that you still find challenging or difficult? Or And or what parts of the make build do you enjoy the most?
I think some of the times is not having all of the answers. So you might have built something before that you think, okay, this is similar to X. But then when you get to it, you're like, oh, this is completely different from that. And I think sometimes it's interesting that it's okay not to know the answers, and that, I am a creative person that's, there to solve those problems along the way and work it out. And you will always work it out. But I think sometimes you can get so bogged down in the detail of it. And again, time pressures that sit with that. And it's always those jobs that you're like, oh, this is fine. I've done this before. I know what that is. I'm going to allocate 2 days to it. The 2 days before delivery. And then you get to day 3 and you're like, I'm still doing this and I'm a day behind.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like always working and developing, but not knowing fully the extent of what you're going to deal with until you're actually creating it. And I think it is challenging, because I think then again, the doubt comes in, the creative roller coaster comes in of, oh, I can't do this. This is not possible. What have I signed up for? Why did I agree to do this? But I think it's just kind of trusting in that process of stepping away, not looking at it. Because I think sometimes you can kind of overlook at it, step away from it, and then go in and be like, okay, this is now the solution to this problem. We can get it fixed.
Which also comes back to people appreciating the process and affording you the right amount of time. Because sometimes 100% of the work gets done in 20% of the time. Yeah. But that 80% of deliberation and deciding what it's not going to do is so essential. And when you cut that out, forget it. Because sometimes it just doesn't flow. But then when it does flow, it can happen very, very quickly. Yeah.
And I think it is that thing of like, you don't always have the answers, and you need some thinking time to just think about it and be like, okay, it's this, and, that's the answer.
What about the other side of that? What do you love doing the most, or what part of the process do you love the most?
I think I really love working with another designer's designs and bringing them to life, and really taking those drawings and pulling them off the page. And different designers that we work with will give you more creative freedom. So some will know all of the details, some will not know the details. You'll say, what's happening on the back of this costume? And they'll be like, oh, I'm sure you'll work something out. And it's having that kind of the freedom to bring that off the page and create it, because I think it's just a really nice collaboration to not have the design sit with me, but have the build sit with me, and have the creation of how are we going to do this, and work with those designers to bring it to life.
I meant to ask you this earlier, with designs and briefs and projects, how much more important has sustainability become, or people's involvement or input into what materials you use or where you're sourcing things from?
Yeah, I think sustainability is a really interesting piece in the costume world, because ultimately costume making is not sustainable. It's not it's not environmentally friendly. The sequins that we're using, the glittery fabrics that we're using, it is predominantly all new cloth, new fabrics. I think for me, I try to spin sustainability a little bit more to be like, okay, if I make this costume really well and we make it properly and we build it to last for 10, 20 years, that's going to be way more sustainable than something that might look amazing today, but tomorrow has fallen apart and needs to go in the bin.
It's interesting, because there's a degree in what you're saying there of comparison when we say about how sustainable it is, because I bet that most costumes that you create are being worn a damn sight more than most clothes, or a lot of clothes that people buy, in terms of like the fast fashion world and that side of things. Yeah.
And I think it's just that thing of like, costumes that I made 15 years ago are still being used. They're still out there. They're still doing, the rounds. And I think for me, that's more where I think, well, I can do my piece by ensuring it's going to last, and have that kind of minimum impact on things, rather than, if it's a costume we've built for a ship and it's been on there for 5 years and 10 different people have worn it, our stuff's still going. Whereas if it wasn't built to last that, every 6 months you might need a new one, which means that the footprint on that is much bigger.
Yeah. You'll be happy to know we are on the home stretch and you've performed admirably so far. In terms of costumes, is there anything that you've seen on any stage or kind of screen that you'd wished you'd created or that you particularly loved?
Yeah, I think there's always stuff that I see and I'm like, okay, I'd really love to have built that. And I think, a big thing at the moment is Death Becomes Her that's on Broadway. Some of those costumes are absolutely amazing. And to have created some of those and done some of those things, I think, would be really cool. And, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do so if it comes here.
Because is that how it will work? That if a show typically transfers from Broadway to West End, it will be a UK production version of that, or?
Yeah, so sometimes it's purchased. So if they've had a tour, or I know that musical's quite new, so I think it only has one iteration at the moment. But if it was to come here, maybe it would be built here. Sometimes they build certain things in the US, but the market's really changed for how they start developing shows, and a lot more shows are being developed here. I think from a cost perspective, I think predominantly we're working at the moment on some costumes for The Greatest Showman. That's all an American costume design team, but it's all being made in the UK and Europe to kind of premiere here. And then it will go on and, hopefully do well everywhere else. And they'll still want it made in the UK.
Yeah. Death Becomes Her, by the way, is just one of those films that, like, when you find it's on, you leave on. I just like, what a great film. Is it Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn and Bruce Willis?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
That's a good film. All right. A couple of the standard questions that we throw at everybody. What's the best advice you've never been given or something you've had to learn the hard way?
I think the piece about it was okay not to follow through with the school.
Yeah.
It was okay not to stick in the, we're all drummed into that you need to stay in the education and get your exams and do well. And I think it's okay not to do well. I think, sometimes you can feel a bit lost and, what is the direction? What am I doing here? And I think that's okay. And I think also if you've got that passion for whatever it may be, just go, really go for it and follow it and, thrive in that, because I think that can be more than any form of degree.
Yeah. And I think with that, like thinking of you going on that tour when you did, it's really useful to understand the day-to-day of a working life and career as well, because it's not the curtain call, the exhibition moment, Saturday Night Live. It's the day-to-day in a studio, hard graft. Exactly. When this is going to be an interesting one with you. When you take 5 or you need to escape, this feature, we call it Come to Your Senses.
Yeah.
Is there something you particularly like to do, to consume, to see, to watch, to listen to? What takes James away to his happy place?
So I find that the whole switching off really, really difficult.
Shocker.
So I think being able to do those things, for one, is being able to switch off. I think sometimes I'm like, okay, it's happened. And it's typically that second week of the holiday when you're on a different time zone and nobody's bothering you because they just need to get on and do it. And you do manage to switch off. I think for me, doing more of that, I think is something that, allows me to kind of switch off, to have time to think. Because I'm always like, my brain doesn't have time to like switch off. And I think it's only more recently that I've kind of learned that that's important.
Yeah.
And I think, when I was younger, I just kept going. I was like a machine, I'd work 7 days a week, every day of the week. And to have time off would be like a dumb thing to do. Why would you have time off? Like, you're doing something that you love. But I think it's kind of having some time to just step out of it a little bit, to be in the real world. Because I do always say to everyone, I work in the land of make-believe. Like, nothing that I do is real. We're creating costumes for people that ultimately trying to bring them the joy and give them that switch off, escapism from real life, that I think I struggle to do that for myself.
Yeah, and I totally relate to that. And it's only in recent years that I have begun to appreciate the impact time off has on my work in a positive respect. And I think it also comes a little bit from, like, if you've been self-employed in the industry for a couple of years, then you just develop that instinct of filling your book, and you're anxious if there's blank spaces in there. And it's again something your attitude must shift on when you're also managing other people, and you start to see in them the need for that. All right. If you gave up what you do, making costumes today, what would you go and do tomorrow?
So I would love to go and work in experiential things. So not creating costumes, but creating worlds. I love theme parks. I love Disneyland, all of those things, and the experience that you get and that feeling that you get while you're there. So it's not necessarily related to costume. It's the whole experience, the feeling, the atmosphere. How are you creating that? Is something that I would love to go into doing.
Do you have a favorite that you've been to or particularly enjoyed?
Not really. I think just that feeling of, going to the US, or, recently I visited Universal Studios in Singapore, and I haven't been for quite a long time, but it's a lot smaller there. But just going and being like, I wish I could be a part of creating something like this, and building that experience.
Well, as I said, everybody keeps telling us that the industry is booming, and it's certainly an exciting time for the UK in terms of the theme park scene. Yeah. Over the next kind of 5 or 6 years, we're going to see some big shifts with Universal and Puy de Fou and other things happening. All right. What advice would you give to yourself right now?
Today?
Yeah.
To not maybe worry so much about things, about, going back a little bit earlier to entrusting in those people, handing that baton over, and just being okay that that's going to happen. And it's not something that you need to kind of worry about so much. Because I think running a business, there are so many things to think about. There's so much responsibility that is sometimes just being like, that just needs to be, completely parked out of your mind, because it's not something you need to kind of worry about. I think I would say. To worry less, or to let go a little bit more. Let go a little bit more.
All right. I'd give all of our guests the opportunity to ask me a question, just in case they, give a shit. Do you have a question for me?
I do have a question for you. What is the best costume that you've ever worn? Or the best character that you've been?
Oh, that is a good question. Well, I've been like some full body characters. I've done quite a bit of full body character work, and really enjoyed a couple of the DreamWorks characters. Yeah. They were both comfortable to wear, which is not always the case, and very, very impressive. I appeared as Barney the dinosaur early in my life a couple of times, which actually gave me a bad back. It had a vent fan in it that was supposed to cool it, but all it actually did was, ultimately cripple you. I don't know. Again, when I worked at Alton Towers a very, very long time ago, they had a costume department that was up in the castle. And if you created a character for something like with the street theatre there, you could kind of go in there and say, hey, I've kind of created this character. This is a little bit what they do. What have you got? What can you make? And they would either from their stores or create something for you. And that was incredible. And that is, it's not like that, now. But so I did do some cool characters there. Yeah, I don't know, but that's a good question. I haven't really been in roles where I've had many kind of like.
But I suppose even in like the costume character world, it's like, oh, it was really cool to be that character.
Oh man, it's what is amazing about that work, particularly if it's a great character, is seeing the look on people's faces when you approach and interact with them.
While you're boiling and sweating, your back's killing you.
Yeah, and somebody's kicking you, in the leg. That is incredible. And from a practical perspective, like the operational side of things, the better it is to wear, the more happy you are as a performer, which absolutely translates. Okay, hey, here's a question. So my better half, Lauren, went to the Pop House Christmas party in Sweden last night, and everybody had to dress as a song. She won the competition. She was up against stiff competition. I think in the final three, there was Purple Rain, there was Lauren, who went as Toxic, Britney Spears, and something else. I forget, maybe Raining Men, I'm not sure. What would you go as if you had to go as a song and presumably make your own costume?
That's a really, really tricky category.
Well, we workshopped a lot. And let me say this, James, I don't think you have to be too, you don't need to go overboard necessarily with it. Because I thought, for example, if somebody wore the date of the day before, they could just be yesterday. We thought about potentially carrying a tray of kind of like chili and maybe an iron and a match, and it could be hot stuff. Gold digger, I think, was something that was workshopped. We liked the idea of hanging on the telephone or call me, like with some kind of phone element.
I'm not sure what I would go for, because I think music-wise, my taste is like really eclectic. So I don't know that there would be a specific song. And typically, I would stay away from any form of dressing up. I would be at the other end of the room. I'm that person at the fancy dress party, not in fancy dress.
Well, one of the other options that we threw out there was the Nirvana hit "Come As You Are." So you simply could have, as you are, come as you are. That, because of the work you do, are you able to go and see anything and enjoy it? Can you switch it off in that environment?
I think it's really interesting because I enjoy it, but I'm always picking at it in my head. And, one of the things is like watching Strictly, and, it's what we love to do in our house is Saturday night watch Strictly. I will sit there, and because of, a lot of what I do is, styling off the peg, element also, alongside the built stuff, that I'm like, okay, that's from ASOS, that's from Topshop, that's from here. And they've amended it and done these things. And, it's actually rubbed off that now my husband is doing it and saying, oh, I've seen that on Facebook. Somebody, that costume that they had was in the window of H&M. So I think it kind of builds that thing of, you start not enjoying it for what it is.
I think I am quite good at switching it off generally. Until something pricks at you and then you fall into it, and then it's kind of like it's an avalanche of deconstructing it. But I do try really hard to still be good at going to watch things as a civilian, because I think it helps.
My worst thing to watch is magicians. Big Box Illusions, because I just spend my whole time pointing out they're in the leg of that table, they're in the steps of that stand.
How fun to go with James.
People that I'm with are like, why are you telling me?
Yeah, I hear you. We've virtually at the end now. The final question that I ask is, who else should I interview? Who do you think would make a good interview? Perhaps somebody that you know or in your atmosphere?
I mean, one person that I've worked with and I think would be really great for you to interview would be Lavoie, who is a friend of mine, Chris Dennis. And he has really honed his craft and worked really hard to get to where he's got to. Luckily, we've been a part of creating some of those amazing looks that he's got. And, I think he's got a really interesting story, and he's a really, really lovely guy.
You can help set that up. I would love to. What a great year. And hurt his ankle, right? Or?
Yes, his foot is currently in a boot, getting better whilst he's doing panto.
Yeah, that's a great shout. Where is he doing panto?
In High Wycombe.
Bit of free promo for you there. Okay, I think this is it. Before you go, let me just ask, where can people see your work right now? Do you have anything in town or on the West End other than the Palladium?
Yeah, so we've got costumes in Starlight Express, the producers. We got to develop some of that stuff this year. Obviously, the Palladium and loads of regional theatres that are kind of everywhere.
Great. James, absolutely, as I knew you would be, you have been fantastic. We've been getting notes from James Maciver. James, thank you very much.
Thank you.